Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 22, Ingram Spark, with Andy Bromley.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Hello, on today's episode of Begin Self-Publishing, I'm going to be talking to Andy Bromley, who's the marketing manager for Ingram, certainly outside the US. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, let me start with some standard broad questions for you. Many self-publishers are happy with using CreateSpace for print-on-demand books. Why should they consider using Ingram Spark as well as or instead of CreateSpace?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's a good question. And I think, to be honest, if as a self-publisher you're really only looking for distribution via Amazon and you're only doing, for example, a certain type of book, then there may be a good reason not to go any further than CreateSpace. So really what Ingram Spark does is it enables you to have a global distribution solution in the US and in Europe and in other markets that's beyond just Amazon. So if you want expanded distribution and to have the same kind of distribution reach that a traditional publisher would have, Ingram Spark can do that for you using the Ingram distribution arm, which is the largest distribution arm in the world for publishing. But I mean, you're right. If you're a self-publisher, you've got a user group that you clearly identify will buy your books, and you really have no interest in selling outside Amazon, then CreateSpace would suit your needs perfectly.
What I understand from people like the Alliance of Independent Authors is that they suggest having both CreateSpace and Ingram Spark set up, because obviously CreateSpace is integrated into Amazon. But on the other hand, Ingram Spark has a lot better distribution for everybody outside of the US, certainly in terms of getting to bookstores and other places.
Yeah, I mean, so essentially, if you use both options, and obviously Ally recommend that, and we recommend that depending on what the publisher's trying to achieve. What that will do, it will give you the best visibility on Amazon by using CreateSpace. But providing you don't opt into expanded distribution, which is a CreateSpace service, then you can use Ingram Spark as well. The reason why you can't use both is essentially when you tick expanded distribution in CreateSpace, Ingram get that file from CreateSpace and we do the expanded distribution on behalf of Amazon CreateSpace. Now, the reason why that's not as superior as going direct is because currently all those books are printed in the US. So, for example, if you had a customer who ordered outside Amazon in Australia or in Europe, what really would prevent that distribution reach would really be the shipping costs, because we would be printing them in one location in the US. Whereas if you had the same file with us in Ingram Spark, we would be able to. There's two things. You could have the imprint as a publisher, and it wouldn't show up as CreateSpace, which it would do if you're using CreateSpace free ISBN. But also we would be able to print it locally to where the customer's based. So obviously if the customer was in Sydney, we'd print it in our Melbourne facility in Australia. If it was in Europe, we'd print it mainly in Milton Keynes in the UK. Or if it was in the US, we'd print it from several different centres closest to where the customer's based.
So how many printing establishments has Ingram Spark got in the world? Is it just those three, or are there others as well?
Essentially, we've got several in the US, and the reason why we've got more than one is to try and get it to the customer. The objective is to get it to the customer within 48 hours, and we can't do that from one location. We've got a print facility in Milton Keynes. We've got one in Melbourne in Australia. And then what we have outside that is what we call Global Connect partners. And this is where we don't own the print-on-demand machinery, but we do plug into local distributors in those markets. So we have them in Brazil, we have them in Poland, Germany, South Korea, Russia as well. And we're looking at expanding that. So that what essentially that is that these are distributions that the local provider has, and they are able to expand the distribution beyond the Ingram network. And where they achieve a sale on behalf of a publisher, they'll print it locally to their market.
Okay. Something that's put me off a little bit myself from going with Ingram Spark is in the Ingram Spark help it says that an internal PDF created from Word can't be used. How would somebody who has like a Word document, say that they've used for the CreateSpace version, create a PDF that can be used with Ingram Spark?
Yeah, and this is something we're looking at to make it more accessible. I mean, currently we do require a PDF print-ready file. I mean, there are templates you can download. Ingram Spark have an agreement with a company called the Book Design Templates, and I think it's Joel Freelander who owns that company. You do have to pay for that, but there are templates you can download that would automatically put it in a print-ready format. Part of the reason why we're a little bit more restrictive on the file formations and how we accept them is that we have the widest range in print on demand in terms of formats that we can take. And also we can do more than one type of colour, which isn't currently possible in CreateSpace. So because we've got different variations and different formats we take, our file intake is a little bit more restricted in that respect. And it is something we're working on, and it's something down the line we'll look at developing tools that are launched in Ingram Spark that can enable a self-publisher to do that.
So at the moment, it would be either buy or use somebody's template like Joel Friedlander's, or pay a designer or somebody with InDesign experience to create an interior file. Then is that what you would suggest?
Yeah, that's the majority. I mean, we do have a number of author publishers who have InDesign or a variation of one of those softwares and do it themselves. But if you're not au fait with that, the easiest way currently would be to download a template to drop the file in, or to get it set up in InDesign, which is particularly key if the file is anything other than Word. One of the fastest growing areas in Ingram Spark is children's books and graphic novels, which obviously have lots of imagery. And that would be even more key that the file's set up correctly in order to get the best product at the back end in terms of printing.
Okay. I mean, you also do hardback and colour books, as you said, which I don't think CreateSpace provide any support for hardbacks at all, do they?
I don't believe so. I mean, obviously CreateSpace are bringing on new services all the time, but last time I checked, didn't do case or what we call hardback. And I believe they do offer colour, but we offer two types of colour. We offer what we call a standard colour and a premium colour. And the difference really is the difference between inkjet colour and using an indigo printer, which is a high-end finish colour. So what that gives publishers the option is to, depending on what they're printing, if it's graphic novels, if it's pastel colours, then an inkjet standard colour would be just as good as a high-end premium colour. Whereas if you're using high-end pictures and picture quality is key, then a premium colour service would be more useful. So we essentially just there's more options that you can choose from in terms of, like you said, hardback, and there's two different colour options, which makes it a lot more affordable to use colour with Ingram Spark than it would do with many other services that provide a similar kind of product.
Okay. There's a question that I've never found an entirely satisfactory answer for. I'm sure there is one. What exactly is the difference between Lightning Source and Ingram Spark? I know people used to use Lightning Source and then Ingram Spark was set up. Yeah,
that's a good question. So basically, you're right. Lightning Source came first, and Ingram Spark came about through a realization that there's a huge growth area in self-publishing. We knew a lot of self-publishers were using Lightning Source prior to Ingram Spark, but it wasn't quite right for their needs. So I'll give you an example that clearly illustrates why you need two platforms, or why having two platforms is useful. Because in Lightning Source, we have lots of large multinational publishers using the service, like Cambridge University Press, for example. They can only sell the books in certain markets because they may have an exclusive distributor in, for example, Asia, and therefore they can't sell in Australia, for example. So the contracts are all split out depending on which regions of the world a publisher may or may not have permission to sell that title in. Within Ingram Spark, it's a global contract. So we assume that a self-publisher won't have any restrictions in place. And therefore, once they give us the title and sign the contract, it's available globally. Where traditionally in Lightning Source, you'd have to sign every contract for each region of the world, because we can't assume that you've got the permission to sell in these markets, because it's a legacy of how the large publishers operate. You know, in terms of printing quality and distribution, it's exactly the same. The file's treated the same, it's printed on the same printer. There's no differentiation. It's mainly how they're set up and how you come in that's different. And also Ingram Spark does have the flexibility of offering ebook distribution for those that want it, where in Lightning Source you don't have that option. We have a separate service called Core Source, which essentially does ebook distribution. And Ingram Spark is just the engine of Lightning Source for print and Core Source for bolted together on a single platform. So that, I mean, that one of the easiest ways of saying why do you need two platforms is really the needs of a large publisher are different to the needs of a self-publisher, because it's very, very unlikely that a self-publisher will have restrictions in place, where it's very likely that a large publisher will have restrictions in place. So therefore the contracts have to reflect both needs.
So really Ingram Spark is a sort of streamlined version for self-publishers then, really, is what you're saying.
I mean, in terms of who uses Ingram Spark, it is broader than self-publishers. We have small micro-publishing companies using it. We have small author services companies using it. We have departments of universities using it for departmental publishing. So even though we recognize a large group of customers using Spark will be self-publishers, it's certainly not all self-publishers. I mean, one of the best-selling books that we have coming out this year, a book from Strathclyde University, their computer science department using it as a way of publishing their own departmental work. So the range of people using Ingram Spark is broader than self-publishers, but we recognize, or we've developed it with the independent publisher in mind. And we define independent publishing as somebody with one book, one author, right through to somebody who may have 5 or 6 people in a team and they may be publishing, 100 books a year.
I understand from our comments before that obviously Ingram Spark has a greater global reach in terms of reaching readers than CreateSpace. Is this true for the location of self-publishers as well? I mean, could somebody in, say, mainland Europe use Ingram Spark to self-publish their book?
Yeah, they can, and we've got publishers using Ingram Spark from all over the world. I mean, the larger concentration is in the US, but we have them from places in Africa, countries in Africa, through to countries throughout Europe, Israel, or US, as well as obviously many countries in Europe using it. The only restriction we've got currently is the contracts are all electronic signatures. So the only restrictions are if a country doesn't recognize electronic signatures, that becomes a problem. And sometimes we do use Lightning Source as a way of navigating around that, because with Lightning Source we still have paper contracts, which is another difference between Ingram Spark and Lightning Source. Okay,
so when North Korea's leader wants to publish, he probably will go through Lightning Source.
Exactly.
Something along those lines.
I use Lightning Source for his propaganda, not Ingram Spark.
Yeah. Personally, I'm not convinced as to why you would use Ingram Spark for ebooks. What are you offering apart from the general aggregator services like Smashwords and Drafted Digital? What advantages do people get by publishing their ebook via Ingram Spark?
There are some really good platforms out there. The two that you mentioned, Drafted Digital and Smashwords, are two of them. So with Ingram Spark, so I mentioned Lightning Source, and I really just say Lightning Source is the engine that enables Ingram Spark to print. And the engine that enables Ingram Spark to distribute ebooks is a platform called Core Source. Now, Core Source is the world's leading digital asset management solution, and it's used by Penguin Random House, for example, use it for ebook distribution. So what that means is that it has the broadest possible distribution of any platform ever. I mean, in terms of the number of platforms that can take a file from Ingram Spark for ebook distribution will be broader than anybody else's, because it's using a platform that works with all the leading trade publishers to effectively do the same thing. The question really is where you're seeing your sales of ebooks, and we know a lot of those sales are coming from Amazon, Apple, or Kobo. So if your primary objective is just to sell on 2 or 3 platforms, then there are other alternatives that you may want to consider, and Drafted Digital and Smashwords are 2 very good platforms. But what Ingram Spark does do, it makes it available to as wider audience or as wide a platform audience as possible. So, for example, Sainsbury's sell ebooks in the UK. If you're in Ingram Spark, you are automatically eligible to be available on the Sainsbury's platform because they take a feed from CoreSource. So it's really about wide distribution because it's using the professional trade publishing arm of CoreSource to send out the distributions. But yeah, it really depends on what your needs are. I mean, some people who use Ingram Spark just want a one-stop shop solution. So they just want one platform to handle their print books and ebooks. And they don't really want to investigate all the other platforms out there. And for those type of people, it's fine. There are others that, like you say, they'll use part of Ingram Spark depending on what their needs are. So we've got people that have their files in CreateSpace, have their files in Ingram Spark. We may or may not have their ebook. They may use Smashwords for that or Drafted Digital. So that with Ingram Spark, you can use it as you see fit. I mean, it really depends on what your needs are. You can use it as a one-stop shop solution if you don't really want to be loading your file multiple times, or if you want to experiment with some of the promotional things that you can do with some of the e-aggregators, you can use them instead. So it's not you can use it as you see fit rather than you're locked into everything. You can just use Ingram Spark for print. You can just use Ingram Spark for e, or you can use it for both. It's really up to you.
Can you determine which ebook stores it will go out to from Ingram Spark, or do you just have to put it out to the ebook network and then it goes out from there? Yeah,
so you have the option to opt out of the Kindle. You can opt out of that. I don't believe it's any broader than that, but again, it's something that we'll be looking at in terms of future rollouts and developments. There are people that opt out of Kindle and then use Ingram Spark for everything else. A bit like how some people use CreateSpace independently of Ingram Spark. You can do the same for ebooks.
Yeah.
It just depends on how much time you want to invest in the other platforms that can do certain things. I mean, it's certainly wise investigating the options with Amazon because to see if you get any extra visibility by going direct, and a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
Currently, you can opt out of Kindle, but everything else is included. I mean, the challenge is that once you start excluding some of the top 2 or 3 platforms, even though we may connect with all of them, they still occupy quite a low market share. And depending on which countries you're targeting, it's likely to yield relatively little return depending on what the book is and which markets you're focusing on.
Yeah. Do the ebooks require an ISBN on Ingram Spark?
You do, yeah, that's right. So you'll need a separate ISBN for your ebook when you submit your file when you submit your file separately. So that would be an EPUB file for your ebook.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything exciting that you've got in the pipeline coming for Ingram Spark? Any new innovations or anything that you want to tell the world about exclusively on this show?
Yeah, what I would say is Ingram Spark we don't see it as a static thing. We are evolving the platform to accommodate different needs. 2 main things that you listeners may be interested in. We will be looking at developing an offer where you can essentially have a widget from your website and sell directly from Ingram Spark. It's not something that we do at the moment, but we are hopefully looking at rolling that out next year. The other thing that is quite key for listeners in the UK is we've launched a UK wholesale program where we can sell directly to bookstores in the UK. So traditionally, what would normally happen is a bookstore like Waterstones that wanted to order an Ingram Spark title, they would usually order from one of their main distributors. And that could be Ingram, being in the US, or it could be gardeners, or it could be Bertrams, and we supply all of those people. They're one of our biggest kind of customers in terms of buying books from Lightning Source and Ingram Spark. But what we're able to do as of about 4 months ago is we have started to reach out to independent bookstores to give them the option of ordering directly from us. So if you're a small independent bookstore, you can order 1s and 2s and still get free shipping, which is unlikely to happen if you order through a main distributor, because they usually require a minimum order. So what that effectively means is that we have a program where independent bookstores can order directly for the first time rather than going through a distributor like Gardner's and Bertram's. And we're also doing a quarterly catalogue. So the best-selling titles that are in Ingram Spark, we're going to feature them in the catalogue and send them to the bookstores to showcase some of the best work that we've got coming from the UK and the US. And Europe. In fact, anywhere that uses Ingram Spark, they'll automatically qualify to be included. But we will make the selection based on bestsellers. So we're not currently selling advertising space, but what we will do is we'll feature some of the best-selling titles and send them as a catalogue to independent bookstores throughout the UK. We've currently got 150 bookstores signed up. We hope to have 200 by the end of this year. And by the end of next year, we'll be looking at 500-600 bookstores signed up to this program.
Okay, well, that's good. Are there any similar plans in the US or anywhere else in the world?
Well, yeah, I mean, within the US, it's slightly less problematic because Ingram is the main distributor in the US. So if you think about your typical bookstore in America, it's very unlikely that they won't have an Ingram account. Where if you look at your typical bookstore in the UK, they probably will have an Ingram account, and many do, but they'll mainly use that to order books that they're trying to source from the US. If they want to buy books from the UK, they would 9 times out of 10 they'd use one of the two main wholesalers like Gardner's and Bertram's. And we've always supplied Gardner's and Bertram's, so we can still connect to those bookstores through the distributors. But if we can connect directly, we can offer better terms. It just encourages people to look at the file for Ingram Spark and Lightning Source because they know they can get free shipping on one copy.
Yeah.
So one of the advantages of that program is if you're an independent bookstore and you sign up directly with us in the UK, even if you wanted to order one book of Ingram Spark on a Monday and one book on a Tuesday and one book on a Thursday, even though those are 3 separate transactions, we could supply them with free shipping. And that's the main advantage. And it's just one way of trying to connect more with the independent bookstore community in the UK, because we're very keen to support bookstores. And really that's where the benefit of using Ingram Spark comes in. And one thing I didn't mention, I'm not actually sure whether this is permissible on CreateSpace or not, but you can mark your book for returns.
Yeah.
So that's another option that's available to you in Ingram Spark.
That isn't something that's available on CreateSpace. My last episode, I interviewed Debbie Young about getting into bookstores, and it seems extremely difficult to do that if you're on CreateSpace or Ingram Spark because of sale return and because the margins are generally better. It's a lot more sensible option for those people who do want to pursue that route.
There are 2 things. But if anyone is using CreateSpace, not to sell their platform, but I would recommend that they buy their own ISBN.
Yeah.
Because one of the options that CreateSpace give you is you can use one of their free ISBNs. But if you do that, the feed shows up as CreateSpace. So the bookstore would know that they're buying an Amazon CreateSpace product. Where if you buy your ISBN or if you use Ingram Spark, you can create your own imprint. So really, if a bookstore's ordering a book through Ingram, or in many cases if they're ordering it through Gardner's or Bertram's, there's no real way of them knowing it's a self-published book. So it kind of forces them to review the merits of the book on the grounds of the book rather than whether it's self-published or not. Where if you were to get a free ISBN through CreateSpace, which you can do, in the feed it shows up as CreateSpace as the publisher. So they'll instantly know that A, it's self-published, and B, it's coming from Amazon. And therefore it's unlikely they're going to place the order on the basis of those two variables.
Okay. The sale and return. If a bookstore returns a book to Ingram, what happens to that book? Does it get shipped up back to the self-publisher, or do you put in a warehouse or pulp it or something? We
currently don't have warehouse facilities in the UK, so the most sensible option is, and it's not something that's the most, you're not the most environmentally friendly, but it's called return and destroy, where we destroy the book on return. There is an option for the book to be returned back to the publisher.
Yeah.
But it's prohibitively expensive, and I wouldn't recommend that outside North America. I mean, one thing I would say is that returns are not something that we see a lot of for the publishers that do select that option. And I think there's a lot of scare stories and concerns in the industry from 15 years ago, when bookstores would order, thousands of copies, only to return thousands of copies just before their payment terms are due to be issued. What used to happen 15 years ago was, in order to get a certain discount, a bookstore would place large orders, knowing, in some cases, not knowing that they can sell those books, and then they come back as a return, and that really hurt the independent publishers quite hard. But really, we because of the way that the industry is moving, we don't see that kind of volatility that we used to see 15 years ago. So even from the publishers that do select return as an option, we see very few returns coming back from both Lightning Source and Ingram Spark. But that is, it is something to consider when you have the option to have no returns, or you have the option to select returns. So you need to bear in mind that you are selecting returns. You do need to compensate the bookstore for returning an item.
Yeah. How does that work in terms of distribution of revenue? Like if you sell a book to a bookstore,
yeah,
do you only get paid once it goes through a certain time period and they haven't returned it, or do they tell you that they've sold it? What
happens is, so each bookstore will have payment terms with whoever they're buying the book from. And it may not be us, it may be that they decide to buy it from, so don't forget, in the UK, they may buy from Gardners and Bertram's. They may not buy directly. So if they were to buy, let's say today's Tuesday, so let's say a bookstore in Wolverhampton decided to buy the book from Gardners. They place the order through Gardners. Gardners would then place the order with us. And as far as we're concerned, a sale is made. So we record the sale from the time somebody places an order. Then we compensate the publisher for making that sale. We only really credit it if the book comes back. So we assume that as soon as an order is placed, it is the sale. And I can't remember exactly whether we pay every 30 days or 40 days, but there's an agreed time that we settle payments with the publisher. So it would then fall within the period of whenever we settle payments with the publisher.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So it's not a case of you're waiting for ages for the book not to be returned before you pay anybody.
No. As far as we're concerned, as soon as somebody places an order, a sale's been achieved. So it could be an Amazon customer ordering it from their home address, in which case we would supply Amazon with that order. Or it could be a bookstore in your local town who's either ordered it directly, and if they do that, we'll send it directly to the bookstore. Or they could be ordering it from any number of different wholesalers. It depends on how they've got their account set up and who they prefer to buy from. So the main thing to know with Ingram and Ingram Spark is we supply mainly the people that sell books. So we're supplying retailers directly, but we're also supplying the middlemen, the wholesalers who pass on those books to those retailers. Because it's really the bookstore's decision on where they buy the book from. The main thing that you've got some assurance with Ingram is that the chances are we'll supply somebody in the chain who's supplying that order. And it could be directly or it could be indirectly through the wholesaler.
Okay, well that's good to know. That just about wraps up the interview. Where can my listeners find out about you and Ingram Spark? They're interested in maybe publishing with Ingram Spark or finding out more?
Yeah, so I mean, if you literally just Google Ingram Spark, it'll bring up our website. It explains the services that we offer, and there is the ability to request further information. So there's lots of guides on how you can work with us through the tools that we've got available, or you can request, somebody make contact with you and they can explain the process.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Well, thanks very much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.